In June 2018, the tranquil outskirts of Portland, Oregon, were rocked by a discovery that sent shockwaves through the community. The Sunrise Rest Motel, a small, unassuming establishment tucked off a quiet highway, became the scene of a harrowing crime. The body of Reverend Michael Blackwood, a 49-year-old preacher revered for his wisdom and unwavering dedication to his congregation, was found lifeless in room 8. Known for his fiery sermons and relentless commitment to charity work, Reverend Blackwood was a figure many looked up to, a beacon of moral strength in a world often clouded by doubt. That perception began to crumble when motel staff, responding to complaints of strange noises and a lingering silence, entered room 8 around 11:30 a.m. The scene they encountered was gruesome. Reverend Blackwood lay sprawled on the floor, his once pristine white shirt stained dark red. The room was eerily quiet, the faint hum of a flickering lamp the only sound. The setting was as unsettling as the crime itself. The peeling wallpaper of the motel room, the stained carpet, and the faint stench of mildew seemed almost too perfect a backdrop for such a macabre scene. Nearby, a small crucifix lay broken, its jagged edges glinting in the weak light, a silent witness to the violence that had unfolded. Police arrived quickly, their flashing lights and somber faces breaking the stillness of the morning. As officers began to cordon off the area, whispers spread among motel guests and staff. Who could have committed such a heinous act? And why would anyone want to harm a man so universally loved? In the hours following the discovery, detectives began piecing together the final hours of Reverend Blackwood's life. Witnesses recalled seeing him enter the motel the previous night around 9 p.m., accompanied by a woman who stood out starkly from the motel's usual clientele. Described as strikingly beautiful, with dark auburn hair and a sharp, commanding presence, the woman had been seen laughing softly as she walked with him into room 8. By midnight, the laughter had been replaced by muffled shouting. A loud crash was heard by guests in nearby rooms, followed by an eerie silence that stretched into the early morning. This was not the Michael Blackwood his congregation knew. To his flock, he was a devoted pastor, a man of unwavering faith and steadfast principles. Yet, as detectives delved deeper, it became clear that there was more to Reverend Blackwood than met the eye. The discovery of his body was only the beginning. What followed would be an investigation that revealed a life steeped in secrets, double-dealing, and dangerous associations. The story of Reverend Michael Blackwood would become a cautionary tale for an entire community, a chilling reminder that even the most righteous can harbor shadows. The investigation into Reverend Michael Blackwood's murder began almost immediately. By the morning of June 17, 2018, the Sunrise Rest Motel was swarmed with police officers, forensic teams, and curious onlookers. Yellow caution tape stretched across the entrance to room 8, marking the starting point of a case that would unravel secrets no one could have anticipated. Detectives focused their initial inquiries on the motel staff and the few guests who had stayed that fateful night. The motel's receptionist, Evelyn Marks, a weary woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes dulled by years of monotony, was the first to provide critical details. She recalled checking in Reverend Blackwood around 9 p.m. the previous evening. Evelyn's attention had been piqued not by the Reverend himself, but by the striking woman who accompanied him. She wasn't the usual type we get around here, Evelyn said, nervously adjusting the name tag pinned to her cardigan. Tall, auburn hair, dressed to kill, looked like she didn't belong in a place like this. They went straight to room 8. Quiet at first, but I remember hearing them later, arguing, I think. The arguing Evelyn mentioned was echoed in other witness statements. Guests from nearby rooms recounted muffled voices escalating into a heated exchange sometime after midnight. Then came the sound of something heavy crashing, a chair or a piece of furniture perhaps, followed by silence. Despite the noise, no one thought to intervene. The Sunrise Rest Motel wasn't exactly known for its sterling clientele or peaceful nights. Most guests had learned to mind their own business. It was an anonymous 911 call placed at 2:15 a.m. that finally drew police to the scene. The caller, a woman whose voice was described as frantic and breathless, claimed a murder had occurred in room 8, but refused to identify herself. "You need to get here now," she had said before abruptly hanging up. Detectives meticulously combed through the crime scene for clues. Blood spatter patterns, the position of Reverend Blackwood's body, and the shattered crucifix lying nearby all suggested a struggle. A small bottle of perfume, its scent still faintly detectable in the air, was found on the bedside table. It was a brand detectives later learned matched that frequently worn by a woman known to frequent the motel, Layla Torres. Layla Torres, 32, was no stranger to law enforcement. Her name was whispered on Portland's streets, often in connection with the city's grittier underbelly. Born and raised in a cycle of poverty and neglect, Layla's past was littered with brushes with the law, petty theft, solicitation, and a history of volatile relationships. But those who knew her described a woman with sharp wit and a disarming charm, a survivor who had learned to navigate life's harshest realities. When motel staff confirmed that Layla matched the description of the woman seen entering room 8 with Reverend Blackwood, she quickly became the investigation's primary suspect. Detectives tracked her movements using surveillance footage from the motel's parking lot. Grainy images showed her arriving with Reverend Blackwood and hours later, fleeing alone into the night, her silhouette disappearing into the shadows. The police issued a warrant for Layla's arrest, but locating her proved difficult. Known for her ability to vanish when things got too heated, she seemed to have gone underground. Meanwhile, detectives began piecing together the relationship between Reverend Blackwood and Layla Torres, a connection that would uncover more questions than answers. As the search for Layla intensified, whispers began to spread in the community. Why had the Reverend, a man so widely respected, been at a rundown motel with a woman like Layla? What had transpired in those final hours that led to such violence? The investigation was far from over, but one thing was clear. This was no ordinary murder. The trail of secrets and betrayal that surrounded Reverend Michael Blackwood's death was only beginning to unravel. As detectives delved deeper into Reverend Michael Blackwood's life, the image of the virtuous preacher began to crumble. What had once seemed a model of faith and integrity now revealed layers of secrecy that even his closest allies could not have imagined. Interviews with members of Blackwood's congregation painted a picture of a man admired for his fiery sermons and tireless community outreach. To his flock, he was a shepherd who guided them through life's storms, a pillar of strength and compassion. But as investigators probed further, whispers of uncharacteristic behavior began to emerge. Late-night absences, unexplained trips, and growing distance between Blackwood and his inner circle. One name surfaced repeatedly in these whispers, Layla Torres. Known in certain circles as a woman who navigated Portland's darker alleys with an air of practiced survival, Layla had a reputation that preceded her. She was connected to the city's seedy underbelly. Rumors of blackmail schemes and illicit dealings surrounded her. How, then, had a preacher like Michael Blackwood become entangled with someone like her? Detectives unearthed a pattern of behavior that raised more questions than answers. Motel records revealed that Blackwood had been a frequent visitor to the Sunrise Rest Motel, always booking room 8 under an alias. His visits were regular, always discreet, and typically late at night. Witnesses described him arriving alone, but often seen in the company of a woman matching Layla's description. What had initially seemed like an anomaly now appeared to be a carefully orchestrated double life. Blackwood's connection to Layla was not a one-time event. It was part of a larger, more complex relationship. Layla Torres, investigators discovered, had lived a life marked by hardship. Orphaned as a child and shuffled through foster homes, she learned early how to fend for herself. Her sharp wit and striking looks had been both her weapon and her shield. By her early 20s, she had become entangled with Johnny Cobra Salazar, a local drug dealer and small-time pimp who ruled his domain with manipulation and fear. For Salazar, Layla was a tool, a means to exploit wealthy men and entangle them in webs of guilt and shame. When Blackwood first encountered Layla, it was likely part of one such scheme. But as investigators pieced together the timeline, it became evident that their connection had evolved beyond Salazar's original intentions. Blackwood, it seemed, was seeking more than physical comfort. Beneath the surface of his sermons and spiritual guidance lay a man plagued by loneliness and guilt. The death of his wife in 2014 had left him hollow, And while he continued to preach redemption, he struggled to find solace in his own faith. In Layla, he found a strange and fleeting reprieve, a reprieve that would ultimately lead to his downfall. But Layla's life was not her own. Bound by Salazar's control, she walked a dangerous tightrope, balancing her growing attachment to Blackwood with the ruthless demands of her manipulative handler. Salazar, always quick to capitalize on weakness, saw Blackwood as an easy mark. A preacher with secrets was a goldmine for blackmail, and Salazar intended to exploit it fully. As detectives followed the threads of evidence, a troubling picture emerged. Blackwood's clandestine visits to the motel were not just acts of weakness, they were part of a larger, darker game. His relationship with Layla was no mere affair. It was tied to a world of coercion, danger, and manipulation that threatened to unravel everything he had built. The revelation of Blackwood's double life sent shockwaves through his community. Congregants who had once hung on his every word now found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about the man they had revered. But for investigators, the story was far from over. What had truly transpired between Blackwood and Layla Torres? And how had their relationship spiraled into the violent confrontation that claimed his life? As the investigation continued, the lines between victim and perpetrator began to blur, leaving more questions than answers in its wake. On the evening of June 16, 2018, Reverend Michael Blackwood checked into the Sunrise Rest Motel under the name Jonathan Moore, as he had done many times before. It was nearing 9 p.m. when he arrived, his movements deliberate but hurried, his demeanor tense. Witnesses described him as glancing around nervously before walking into room 8 with Layla Torres. Layla, striking as always, wore a fitted black dress that seemed out of place in the rundown motel. Despite her composed exterior, she carried the weight of desperation. Her handler, Johnny Cobra Salazar, had been pressuring her to extract more money from Blackwood. Layla knew the stakes. Failure to deliver would mean facing Salazar's wrath, a prospect more terrifying than she cared to admit. The atmosphere inside room 8 was charged from the start. Blackwood, already burdened by guilt and fear, was on edge. Layla's demands for money escalated the tension. She needed cash, more than usual, and she needed it that night. Blackwood, however, was done. "No more," he said, his voice firm but trembling. "I've given you enough. I can't keep doing this." Layla pleaded with him, her voice raw with urgency. "You don't understand. If I don't bring him what he wants, it's over for me. Please, Michael, I'm begging you." But Blackwood couldn't see past his own turmoil. To him, Layla's plea wasn't just a cry for help. It was another betrayal in a relationship that had already cost him too much. His faith, his morals, and his reputation were crumbling under the weight of their arrangement. "You're using me," he accused, his voice rising. "I thought I could help you, save you, but you've been playing me this whole time." The argument spiraled. Words became louder, harsher, and more pointed. Blackwood's anger clashed with Layla's desperation, and the room grew heavy with the unspoken truths they were too afraid to face. At some point, Layla broke. "You think I want this?" she shouted. "You think I wanted to use you? You have no idea what he'll do to me if I don't do what he says." Her confession struck Blackwood like a blow. The man who had seen himself as her savior now realized he was merely a pawn in a much larger, darker game. The realization left him reeling. What happened next remains a point of contention. Witnesses reported hearing raised voices around midnight, followed by the sound of a chair crashing to the floor. Inside room 8, the confrontation turned physical. Layla, cornered and terrified, lashed out in a moment of panic. The struggle was chaotic. Blackwood stumbled, knocking over a chair as he tried to regain his footing. Layla, in her desperation, grabbed the small crucifix he always carried, a symbol of his faith now turned into a weapon. The jagged edges of the broken crucifix glinted in the dim light as it was thrust forward in a moment of blind fear and fury. When the chaos subsided, Reverend Michael Blackwood lay lifeless on the carpet, his white shirt soaked through with blood. The room was silent, except for Layla's shallow breaths as she realized what had just happened. Overwhelmed by the magnitude of her actions, Layla fled the scene. She stumbled into the parking lot, her heels clicking against the pavement as she disappeared into the night. Somewhere in the darkness, she found the strength to dial 911, her trembling voice reporting the crime without revealing her identity. By the time police arrived, the motel was quiet once more, the flickering neon sign casting eerie shadows over room 8. Inside, the scene told a story of desperation, betrayal, and violence. A story that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Layla Torres vanished into the night, her actions that evening sealing not only Reverend Blackwood's fate, but her own as well. The events leading to the murder were tragic and complex, the culmination of months of manipulation, fear, and fractured trust. Yet they left behind more questions than answers, questions that would haunt the investigation in the days to come. The aftermath of Reverend Michael Blackwood's murder sent shockwaves through Portland, Oregon, and beyond. As police worked tirelessly to track down Layla Torres, they uncovered a web of manipulation and crime tied to a man known as Johnny Cobra Salazar, a local drug dealer and small-time pimp with a reputation for control through fear and exploitation. Salazar was the shadowy figure behind many of Layla's actions, orchestrating her movements and leveraging her vulnerabilities for his own gain. Witnesses and informants described him as a ruthless manipulator who thrived on coercion, targeting individuals like Layla to exploit their desperation. When police finally located Layla Torres in a rundown apartment on the outskirts of the city, she was a shadow of the striking figure seen on motel surveillance footage. Exhausted, trembling, and visibly afraid, she surrendered without resistance. During initial questioning, Layla admitted to being in room 8 on the night of Blackwood's murder. However, she insisted that while she had been part of the events leading up to the confrontation, she was not the one who had ultimately taken the Reverend's life. According to Layla, Salazar had orchestrated the entire situation. He had pressured her to extort more money from Blackwood, threatening her with violence if she failed. Layla claimed that after her argument with Blackwood turned physical, Salazar himself had arrived at the motel, furious over her failure to extract the money. Her account painted a chaotic scene, Salazar storming into the room, shouting threats, and ultimately overpowering Blackwood in a fit of rage. Layla admitted to fleeing the room in panic, but she swore she had not been the one to deliver the fatal blows. Police were initially skeptical of Layla's version of events, but further investigation began to support her claims. Witnesses near the motel described seeing a man matching Salazar's description lurking around the area that night, and forensic evidence from the scene, including a partial fingerprint on the broken crucifix, tied him to the crime. Salazar was arrested a month later in a dramatic raid on a suspected drug operation. By the time the case went to trial in early 2019, the courtroom was packed daily with reporters, onlookers, and members of Blackwood's shattered congregation. The trial became a media sensation, not only for the grisly nature of the crime, but for the shocking details it revealed about Blackwood's secret life and the dangerous world he had become entangled in. Layla Torres, now both a key witness and a defendant, delivered a harrowing testimony. She spoke about her life under Salazar's control, detailing years of abuse, manipulation, and exploitation. Her testimony painted Salazar as a predator who thrived on fear, using women like Layla as pawns in his schemes. She admitted to her role in the blackmail attempts, but maintained that she had never intended for the situation to spiral into violence. Layla's raw and emotional account earned her some sympathy, though it also highlighted the depths of her involvement in Salazar's operations. Prosecutors painted Salazar as the mastermind behind the events leading to Blackwood's death. They argued that his greed and ruthless methods had pushed both Blackwood and Layla into an impossible situation, ultimately culminating in the Reverend's brutal murder. The defense, meanwhile, sought to shift blame entirely onto Layla, portraying her as an opportunist who had manipulated both Salazar and Blackwood for her own gain. The trial became a battleground of competing narratives, with every new revelation deepening the sense of betrayal felt by Blackwood's congregation and the wider community. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for several days before delivering their verdict. Layla Torres was acquitted of Blackwood's murder, her claims of self-defense bolstered by evidence of Salazar's threats. However, she was convicted on lesser charges of blackmail and sentenced to probation and community service. For Johnny Cobra Salazar, there was no leniency. He was found guilty of multiple charges, including second-degree murder, extortion, and conspiracy. His sentencing brought a sense of closure to many, though the trial left lingering questions about the choices and vulnerabilities that had led to Blackwood's tragic end. The trial's conclusion marked the end of a harrowing chapter, but for those involved, the scars remained. Reverend Blackwood's congregation grappled with the loss of their leader and the revelations of his double life. Layla Torres, though free, faced the daunting task of rebuilding her life and grappling with the weight of her past. The courtroom drama had revealed shocking truths about exploitation, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of desperation. Yet, even as the trial ended, the shadow of Room 8 lingered, leaving behind a chilling reminder of the fragility of trust and the dangers of secrets left unchecked. In the wake of the trial, the people closest to Reverend Michael Blackwood faced the daunting challenge of rebuilding their lives. For some, the journey was about rediscovering purpose amid the ruins of betrayal. For others, it was about confronting the lingering shadows of guilt, regret, and shame. Elizabeth Blackwood, the preacher's estranged daughter, bore one of the heaviest burdens. For years, Elizabeth had distanced herself from her father, and harboring resentment over his actions during her mother's illness. She had discovered his infidelity, a betrayal that shattered their family and left wounds that never fully healed. By the time of her father's death, Elizabeth had not spoken to him in years, and the revelations of his double life only deepened the fracture. Following the trial, Elizabeth withdrew from public view. The scandal surrounding her father's death thrust her into an unwelcome spotlight, with whispers of judgment and speculation following her wherever she went. By late 2019, she moved away from Portland, seeking a fresh start in Seattle, where no one knew her as the preacher's daughter. In Seattle, Elizabeth found solace in social work, dedicating herself to helping at-risk youth, an echo of the compassion she had once admired in her father. Yet, the weight of his actions lingered, casting long shadows over her life. She replayed their last conversation in her mind, wondering if she could have mended their relationship before it was too late. The questions haunted her, but the answers remained elusive. Meanwhile, Layla Torres also struggled to rebuild her life. Acquitted of murder, but sentenced to probation and community service for her role in the blackmail scheme, Layla became determined to turn her pain into purpose. By early 2020, she had joined a local non-profit dedicated to supporting survivors of abuse and exploitation, using her own experiences to guide and inspire others. Layla's transformation was not without challenges. Her reputation as a woman tied to Johnny Salazar's dark world followed her, making it difficult to gain trust or acceptance in her new role. Yet she persevered, holding weekly support group meetings in a small community center. The room, dimly lit but filled with warmth, became a safe space for women to share their stories and take steps toward reclaiming their lives. For Layla, the support group became more than a job, it was her redemption. She spoke openly about her past, detailing the manipulation and abuse she endured under Salazar's control. Her honesty resonated with others, empowering them to break free from similar cycles of exploitation. While Elizabeth and Layla worked to rebuild their individual lives, the Portland community grappled with the broader fallout of the scandal. The Sunrise Rest Motel, once a haven for shadowy dealings, became a symbol of the tragedy. In 2021, local authorities shut down the dilapidated establishment, citing years of criminal activity and safety violations. Its boarded-up windows and faded neon sign stood as a stark reminder of the events that had unfolded there. The congregation Reverend Blackwood had once led was left fractured and adrift. The pews of the small church, once filled with devoted followers, were now half empty. For many, reconciling the man they revered with the man revealed in the trial proved impossible. Whispers of betrayal and disappointment lingered during every sermon, delivered now by an interim preacher who struggled to fill the void left by Blackwood's fall from grace. Some members clung to their memories of Blackwood's compassion and guidance, refusing to let the revelations tarnish the good he had done. Others, disillusioned and hurt, left the church altogether, questioning not just their faith in Blackwood, but in the very institution he had represented. As the years passed, The memory of the murder faded from headlines, but its impact remained. For Elizabeth Blackwood, Layla Torres, and the Portland community, the tragedy became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how secrets, desperation, and betrayal could ripple outward, altering lives in ways no one could have foreseen. By 2022, Elizabeth had found a semblance of peace in her work, though she continued to carry the weight of her father's legacy. Layla, now a respected advocate for survivors, had transformed her life into one of purpose, using her story to inspire change. Yet, for both women, and for the congregation left behind, the scars of Reverend Michael Blackwood's double life were a reminder that some wounds never fully heal. Even years after Reverend Michael Blackwood's murder, questions about the events of that fateful night in Room 8 lingered. The investigation had provided many answers, but not all of them were complete. The shadows cast by his hidden life and the tragic circumstances of his death left mysteries that would likely never be fully resolved. The most persistent question revolved around the unidentified figure seen by a witness on the night of the murder. A man in a dark hoodie had been spotted leaving the motel shortly after the fatal confrontation. While Layla Torres and Johnny Salazar were implicated in the crime, the identity and role of this unknown individual remained a haunting loose end. Was he an accomplice, a bystander who saw too much, or someone tied to Blackwood's past, returning to settle an old score? Adding to the intrigue were the entries in Blackwood's private journal, discovered during the investigation. The journal, filled with cryptic reflections, spoke of a looming shadow that he feared in his final weeks. While many assumed this was a metaphor for his guilt or Salazar's growing threats, others speculated it hinted at something or someone else entirely. The entries raised unsettling questions about how much Blackwood had known about the dangers he faced and whether he had been seeking redemption or simply preparing for the inevitable. For the congregation he left behind, reconciling Blackwood's public persona with the truth that emerged after his death was an uphill battle. To many, he had been a source of strength and guidance, a man who had helped them weather their darkest moments. Yet, the revelations of his secret visits to the Sunrise Rest Motel and his entanglement with Layla Torres and Salazar painted a vastly different picture. Some congregants clung to the memory of the man they had known, choosing to focus on his compassion and the positive impact of his ministry. They argued that everyone has flaws and that Blackwood's failings, while grave, did not erase the good he had done. For these individuals, forgiveness became a path to healing, a way to honor the best of Blackwood while acknowledging his humanity. Others, however, struggled to move past the betrayal. They felt deceived, as if the man they had trusted had made hypocrites of them all. His hidden life called into question not only his integrity, but the teachings he had built his ministry upon. For these individuals, the church's stained glass windows now served as reminders of the shattered image of a man they had once revered. The Portland community at large was similarly divided. The scandal became a cautionary tale, often whispered about in the context of moral failings and the dangers of unchecked power. To some, Blackwood's story was a tragedy of human weakness, a man undone by loneliness and desperation. To others, it was a chilling reminder that even those in positions of trust and respect can harbor dark secrets. The closing of the Sunrise Rest Motel in 2021 symbolized the end of an era, but it also left behind a physical reminder of the unresolved mysteries. The boarded-up building, with its flickering neon sign now dark, stood as a monument to the events that had unfolded within its walls, a stark and haunting symbol of the tragedy that had forever altered lives. By 2022, the congregation had moved forward with a new preacher, but the echoes of Blackwood's life and death still lingered. Each Sunday service carried a different weight, a blend of hope for renewal and the unspoken reminder of the fragility of trust. In the end, Reverend Michael Blackwood's legacy was a paradox. To some, he was a man of faith who had stumbled and fallen. To others, he was a symbol of betrayal and hypocrisy. His story became more than just a tale of murder. It was a reflection on the complexities of human nature, the consequences of secrecy, and the enduring struggle to reconcile faith with imperfection. The questions surrounding Room 8 remain unanswered, but the impact of those moments is undeniable. The people affected, his estranged daughter Elizabeth, Layla Torres, his congregation, and the wider community, continue to grapple with the truths and uncertainties left behind. The story of Michael Blackwood serves as a chilling reminder that even the most righteous facades can conceal the darkest of shadows.